Before creating a Scrum board, let's look at some of the basic terminologies that we have in Scrum framework. The first term that we have in Scrum is backlog. Well, backlog is a list of tasks that represents outstanding work in a project. Usually, a project would have issues in the backlog, and you can add these issues to a sprint so your team can work on them. Well, the another term that we have related to backlog is backlog grooming. Backlog grooming, or also known as backlog refinement, is when the product owner and some or all of the rest of the team review items on the backlog to ensure the backlog contains the appropriate items, so that the backlog items are prioritized and the items that are on the top of the backlog are ready for delivery. Well, any user of Jira can add items in backlog, but it totally depends on product owner what items are ready for refinement or ready for delivery in backlog. The next and an important term that we have in Scrum framework is user story. Well, user stories are one of the primary development artifacts for the Scrum teams. A user story is a very high level definition of a requirement, containing just enough information so that the developers can produce a reasonable estimate of the effort to implement it. In user story, we have three criteria. Well, we have as a role, the goal we desire, and what would be the benefit that we produce from that goal. So in as a, we have who wants this piece of functionality. In I want what the user wants. So that what would be the benefit or what would be the feature that develop after we implement this feature. For example, let's say a book buyer. I want to search for a book by ISBN so that I can find the right book quickly. A user story will be typically be assigned a priority by the PO and a size estimate by the team in the story card. So here we have a book buyer as a role. The requirement is to search for a book by ISBN, and what would be the benefit is that they can find the right book very quickly. In user story, we have a principle that applies is invest, where I stands for independent, N stands for negotiable, V stands for valuable, E stands for estimable, S stands for small, and T stands for testable. In user story, we have a principle that applies is invest, where I stands for independent, N stands for negotiable, V stands for valuable, E stands for estimable, S stands for small, and T stands for testable. Have I, that is independent. So a user story should be independent. Before starting a user story, product owner make sure that all its dependencies get resolved. Then only that user story gets picked. Well, the another term that we have is negotiable. The user story should be negotiable. Well, after development, you never want your user story should go in vain. You always want some benefit out of your user story. So that's why it should not be negotiable. Next we have valuable. Well, the user story should generate some value. It totally depends on product owner what user story need to be picked first in development and what value should it deliver. The next term that we have is estimable. Well, a user story should be defined in a way that the team can estimate the completion of that user story. Well, the next term that we have is small. So a user story should be small in size. The next we have is testable. Well, user stories are defined in such a way that our testing team can test those user stories. Let's move forward to another term that we have in Scrum is epic. Well, epic is a large body of work that can be broken down into number of smaller stories, or we also call them issues. Epic often encompass multiple teams on multiple projects and even can be tracked on multiple boards. Epics are almost always delivered over a set of sprints. Another term that we have is story points. Well, story points is a simple way to estimate the level of effort expected for a story based on the size and complexity of the story. Well, story points totally depends on the complexity of the story. It does not depend on the duration. In story points, values are often scaled based on the Fibonacci series. So a story point can be rated as 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, or 13 story points. The next thing that we have, the Scrum Rules. So there are three major roles in Scrum: product owner, Scrum Master, and the development team that includes all the programmers and the testers. The next thing that we have is the product backlog and sprint backlog. So a backlog is divided into two types: product backlog, and the other that we have is sprint backlog. Product backlog lists all the work to be performed by the team. Well, product backlog totally depends on the vision of success by the product owner in the future. Product backlog contains all the items having well-defined requirements and those requiring further definition. While on the other hand, sprint backlog is, is the one that has all the requirement well defined and can also be worked with little change over 30 days or within a sprint time. All the items that we have in sprint backlog were always targeted for the delivery. Well, another important thing that we have in our Scrum are Scrum meetings. There are four meetings that we have in our Scrum are sprint planning, daily stand-up meeting, sprint review, and retrospective. Well, before starting a sprint, we have a sprint planning meeting. During a sprint, we have daily stand-up meetings. During the end of the sprint, we have sprint review. And after the completion of sprint, we have a retrospective meeting. Let's discuss more about these meetings that we have in our Scrum. First, let's look into the sprint planning meeting. Well, sprint planning meeting is attended by all the members of the Scrum team. In this meeting, the development team identifies the story from the product backlog for development and delivery in the current sprint. That backlog is defined by the product owner. Well, the sprint planning ceremony always happens before the start of the sprint so that all the members of the Scrum team are being assigned to a proper task that they are planning to achieve within the sprint. The next meeting that we have is daily stand-up meeting. Well, the daily stand-up meeting is attended by the Scrum Master and the development team. Here in the daily stand-up meeting, the presence of product owner is optional. In daily stand-up meetings, each team member answers the following questions: what was done yesterday, what will be done today, and what are the blockers. As a best practice, it is advised to wrap up the daily stand-up meeting within 15 minutes. The next meeting that we have is sprint review. Well, this meeting is attended by all the members of the Scrum team. Here in the sprint review meeting, the development team demonstrate the developed features in the form of delivery to the stakeholders. During the sprint review meeting, feedbacks are noted down by the product owner, which will be converted into new user stories to be developed in the future sprints. Another meeting that we have is sprint retrospection meeting. Well, the sprint retrospection meeting is attended by all the members of the Scrum team. The main agenda of this meeting is to retrospect how the sprint went by. In retrospective, we also have three criteria: what went well, what did not, and what needs to be changed. Well, sprint retrospective meeting provides an opportunity to improve in the next sprint. Here in this meeting, team agrees on the improvement plans for the future sprints. Another thing that we have in Scrum are reports. So we have following reports in our Scrum. We have burn down chart, we have sprint report, we have burn up chart, we have velocity chart. Let's create a Scrum board in Jira and look at these following items from the Jira perspective.